Hey guys, I'm Phoenix here and welcome to a video on a comment that was made on my EU video, in fact. So it's a bit of a follow-up to the EU video. Now, I should actually pull it up. Shush me. So the great thing about this is that he's created some talking points for me. Some things to reply to, and he's also created a good idea of what your average vote leave person thinks. An awful lot of this is figures that haven't been represented in a fair and balanced way. For example, he pulls up the £350 million a week to the EU. Now, some of his points I don't have the figures on. He's not provided me with any sources, so I can't do any more digging. But so this is a myth that keeps popping up endlessly in everything, and I quite like to try and help quash it, even if it's just one voice in a sea of thousands of people talking about this £350 million a week. Actually, it's a lot less than that, as this little graphic shows. So, first of all, this rebate up here. This rebate doesn't actually go to Brussels at all. So, the rebate is £4.9 billion a year. We keep that, so we can spend that on whatever we like. The EU then gives the UK some money to spend in the UK, which amounts to £4.4 billion. So we send all of this lot to Brussels, and they send us this back. They also give £1.4 billion to the private sector, and £0.8 billion to EU aid spending counted against our target. Yeah. The result is that the cost of our membership actually only equates to £6.3 billion a year. Now, they do also say £6.3 billion a year compares with the UK's GDP of £1,865 billion a year, which amounts to 0.3%. Yeah. We give 0.3% of our annual GDP to Brussels for them to do whatever they need to do with it. It's ridiculous. It's a tiny amount. He also talks about TTIP, which is I don't have it. Do I have it? Yes, this one. This is the one. So the myth is the trade deal the EU is signing with the US will lead to the privatisation of the NHS. Actually, it doesn't. Ultimately, what it talks about is something to do with drugs. Hold on, where is it? It's ensuring. So it's ensuring competition in public procurement. So it just means that everyone's on a level playing field when it comes to offering a certain type of drug to the NHS for a certain cost. Pretty much. I'll link all this stuff in the description so you can have a peruse at your own leisure. Right. It's talking about voted against 72 measures in the EU Council and defeated 72 times. Quite a lot of that is due to the people that we've got in the EU Council. UKIP, for some reason, has seats in the EU Council. They don't turn up to votes. The important ones, they turn up, but they turn their back to the council. So, I think quite a bit of that is to do with the people that we have fighting for UK concerns. And also, we do still have the power of veto, which he doesn't talk about at all. We do have that power of veto. Any membership into the EU has to be a unanimous vote. And the UK can say that they don't want a country in the EU. And they won't be able to get into the EU. It's a unanimous vote. So if they say no, the country in question, which might very well be Turkey, can't get in. And he also doesn't cover, the check sheets that I commented on. So there is an awful lot of power there, but I do believe that maybe our governments are being a little bit too are agreeing too much with the EU, because they want to feel like they're being a power for change in the EU by just agreeing with the EU. Might be what's happening. I don't know. Certainly, our last several governments have been spineless. There's not been any sort of strength there, and that's a shame. I'd like to see Jeremy Corbyn change governments. Certainly make Labour a force to be reckoned with. Who knows? He's trying. He seems to be trying to do the best he can, and that's all we can ask, really. Right. Oh yeah. Apparently, we're not allowed to nationalise due to EU rules. We are actually. Is it this one? Yes, it's this one. So the EU rules allow for nationalisation of government-supported enterprises, but it's so we are allowed to renationalise aspects of our infrastructure. EU rules, EU regulations allow it. What they don't allow is when a government creates a monopoly and then charges the consumers of that monopoly a massive amount to to pay for whatever they're paying for. So if they're paying for electricity, if they take over the electricity companies and then hike the prices for no reason, that would be something that the EU would then step in on. That's all. So the Tories could buy Port Talbot tomorrow. They won't, because it doesn't make them any short-term profit. And that's pretty much what we're seeing from successive governments living in the short term. So 10 years ago, New Labour could have ordered new nuclear power plants, but they didn't, because it wasn't something they had to worry about. It's all about the short term with them, with a lot of the governments that we've had since. The thing was, Thatcher did an awful lot of bad in the UK, but at least she was a strong figure. She knew what she wanted to do, and we haven't been seeing that, and that's a real shame. Hell, she was the one who got the rebate from the EU. So even though she basically destroyed the entirety of the UK's industry, she did get that rebate from the EU. So that's something reasonably decent that she did, I guess. I guess I do have sort of a begrudging respect for a strong Prime Minister. Even if they haven't done particularly good things, at least they've known what they wanted to do. Churchill was very much the same. It was under his authority, I guess, that certain aspects of the military did things that they weren't comfortable with doing, such as the formation of the commandos. And the tank buster bomb, the sticky bomb, was one of his as well. He forced the military to make and issue the sticky bombs so that infantry had a chance against tanks. They weren't great. You had to walk up to the tank and place them on the tank and then release the handle and then walk away. They weren't particularly good design, but at least they gave infantry some way of beating tanks, apart from obviously the Piat. So yeah. Crime stats. Yeah, these were inaccurate. EU migrants have been found guilty of 146,100 crimes, except they haven't. They have been... It's notifications. Criminal notifications. So this is where the UK has notified other countries when their citizens have been convicted, appealed their convictions, or break court orders. So anything surrounding their convictions, which also includes appeals and breaking court orders and the like, that's what they're talking about there. So it's notifications, not guilty of 146,100 crimes. And as you can see here, the two very, very different headlines that they published online. This was from the Daily Mail. They basically took some figures that were released by the government, and it was the National Police Chiefs Council, and twisted it to suit their ends. Are we surprised? No, not really. After was it the Sun who did the 1 in 5 Muslim support terrorists in support joining ISIS? I think that was the headline, which was a complete fabrication, and it came from a study that talked about it asked people a very, very open question of, do you support people who go to fight in Syria? It didn't specify for which side, so it got a very sort of, vague figure, and then that was chopped into a headline that would shock people and make people read their paper, and sent out without really any thought, ultimately. So it's not crimes, it's notifications. And, including murder and rape. Well, yeah, Britons do that as well. Some not particularly pleasant. And, I've probably said enough on that subject without getting myself into more trouble. Average age for Britain to get on the housing ladder has now risen to 31 due to demand for housing caused by mass and uncontrolled immigration. No, that's as a result of no affordable housing being built in population centres such as London. If you go to London at the moment, you'll see a lot of housing being built. Not much of it is affordable. Certainly not on somebody earning 21,000 a year for sort of a base job in London. They're not going to be able to afford a place in London. So the problem with that is that governments have been reluctant to enforce the construction of affordable housing near the cities, because they can just let private companies build whatever they like and get some money out of it, ultimately. 100,000 children have thought to have missed out on their first choice secondary school. I missed out on my first choice secondary school. I wanted to go to a non-Catholic school. I ended up going to a Catholic school in the end. Possibly the reason why I'm an atheist now. Who knows? Again, that's linked to the housing problem, that governments have been thinking short-term, not long-term, so they haven't been building the schools that have been required, because as our population centres get larger. This isn't necessarily an immigration problem, but this is a problem with population centres getting larger, people having more kids, which means more kids need to go to school. It's linked to immigration, because obviously without any immigration we wouldn't have as much of a population growth, but we would still have that population growth. A lot of this stuff I don't have any figures for, and the NHS paid almost 6.2 billion for expats, but received only 405 million back for EU nationals. I've got no figures to support that. And does he mean 6.2 billion for people who are UK citizens but live elsewhere, or European citizens who live in the UK. I'm not completely sure about that. Between 2000 and it's also important to note that not all countries have a system like the NHS. So, yeah. So if somebody from England who lives in Spain, in one of those British villages in Spain, and they eat English food in Spain, if they get ill, they might very well return back to the UK to get treatment, and then go back to Spain once they're better. Between 2000 and 2013, the EU generated 183 legal instruments, which Norway and Iceland adopted fewer than 10%, and Swiss none at all. In the same period, Britain, by contrast, had to apply 100% of EU regulations to its economy. Had to, or did, or wanted to. Again, did they have to do that, or did the government agree to do that? That is two very, very different things. And again, I've got no citation for that. The fishermen's fishing rights have been divided among EU member states. I've got no citations on this whatsoever, but I do know that there has been concern from fishermen that their fish stocks, are being depleted. But they're not being depleted by British fishermen, because British fishermen have a lot of mandates. That they can only fish so much, whereas people from the EU, which are fishing in British waters or international waters that sort of border on British waters, are actually fishing as much as they like, because they are able to. This is a case of Britain wanting to replenish its fishing stocks, while French fishermen don't necessarily have those restrictions. There's probably an issue there, and in that case, shouldn't the government be doing something to ensure that EU fishing boats aren't depleting fish stocks in the North Sea? Surely that's a question for the government. Right, so his last bit, which, yeah. Catastrophic vote to stay, and you'll be not given another chance to close Pandora's box for generations. Will rubber stamp allowing in 500,000 hope into this tiny island, the most densely populated in Europe after Malta. For generations with greenbelt land concreted over and over for generations. Good luck trying to explain that to your children when they ask what happened to the fields in which they laughed and played in when they were young. Surely they'll know what happened to the fields, because chances are they won't necessarily have grown up in fields. See, this is the thing, I'm a Londoner, okay, so the fields that we had, the parks, ultimately, were areas of land that couldn't be built on. So, as a result, they'd been converted into public spaces. Now, there are, actually, in the middle of London, you've got this massive amount of London, and you've got this random park, Hyde Park, in the middle of it. And you go from, the embassies and, the police officers with guns and all that sort of thing, just the chaos of London. You walk into the park and it's just, it's such a divide. But here's the thing, London doesn't necessarily need to expand out. What it needs to do is make better use of its land, and it's got an awful lot of land both above and below, because it's got all those tunnels that are abandoned. They were built for all sorts of things. Victorians built tunnels, Britain built all kinds of shelters. There's an underground city that they built. All sorts of things that they did ultimately because of war. Victorians did it because of the underground, and as a result, there's all these spaces, little spaces all over London that they could potentially use as housing, as shops, as industry, but they won't for some reason. And again, this is very much to do with governments being strong enough to put through policies that maybe doesn't make the country much money, but it actually makes lives of everyone who lives there a lot better, because they can afford then to live in London and work in London, so they can, live just down the road from where they work. I think that is the sort of thing that we should be talking about. And this isn't an EU problem, this is a government problem. This is a problem with governments not being strong. Also, he mentions Pandora's box. Now, Pandora's box, as the myth goes, the box was opened and let loose all the evils. And the last thing that was left in Pandora's box was hope. Why would we want to close Pandora's box? Why wouldn't we want that hope left in the world? And that's what the EU is, ultimately. It's hope for a group of countries to work together to create something better. If something's worth fighting for, I think the EU is worth fighting for. But I also believe that the EU should be able to be strong, together or apart. And those countries should have the support of the countries around them to make them stronger. If a country is having problems, help them out. Because ultimately, by helping them out, 5 years later down the line, when they're doing well, and we're not doing so well, they might be more willing to help us out. And so, there's less inclination there to take something through violence. There's more inclination there to trade. To not necessarily trade goods, but to trade hope, I guess. I am baffled, ultimately, with the Vote Leave side, because they are so blind to the facts that are there. They get some facts, and then they just stick with them, even though clarifications have been made. This is a case that we see with a lot of factions. A faction can only continue through 2 ways. Either by becoming something else, or by using fear to entice people, more and more people in. And I really do see both the Leave side and Stay side as factions that are using fear to try and suck people in, instead of using facts to show people, well, to show people the truth, I guess. I can't say really any more on this. Certainly, if you've got any more comments, if you've got any citations, if you're gonna post a pretty well written wall of text, actually, some of the insults could have stayed out of it, but all in all, it was a pretty well written thing, and it gave me some things to dig into a little bit deeper. But if you're going to write something like this, can you add some citations so that I can dig into it a little bit more? Maybe do another video on it, if there's enough to really go into. Yeah. Thank you, Paul W. I'm sorry that YouTube blocked your post for some reason from popping up, so I had to manually go in and say, yeah, that post is fine to be in comments. So sorry that this taken a look, and for some reason it won't let me reply to it either, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, thank you for the comment. You gave me something to dig through, and yeah, awesome. So if you've watched this little follow-up video on the EU referendum, looking at Paul W's stuff, then yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.